Hi guys, Dina here, back again. This video is just a from the collection video, so it's not anything in particularly new that I've got coming in. It's more just stuff that I've been listening to over the last few weeks. So yeah, pretty much as I may have mentioned in the last couple of videos anyway, been listening to a lot of sort of progressive stuff. Alongside the metal and a few bits and bobs of others as well. So yeah, let's basically just get straight into it. So first of all, I'm going to show you Marillion, Clutching at Straws. Now a few people seem to regard these as not a prog band. I think that's probably always been up for debate, certainly during Fish time with them. I think they were potentially classed as neo-prog, whatever that means. Personally, I've always thought of them as prog. Obviously they had quite commercial sensibilities. Obviously they had very good sales with things like Misplaced Childhood and so forth, and obviously there were a couple of singles off this one, but I think towards well, they've always had, going through their albums, and I think whether that's Fish's influence or the rest of the band members, you know, that sort of general sort of prog sort of feel to them. Obviously they've had their influences and stuff over the years, so obviously that's sort of rubbed off on them, but yeah, basically I put this on. The idea was that I was going to go through the sort of early Hogarth albums, so I thought I'd start with Clutching at Straws, and then sort of work through. So Season's End obviously was the first album with Steve Hogarth on vocals after Fish's departure. Now I really love it. At the time, I suppose it's that whole thing with the lead singer leaving the band, what they're going to be like, you know, how can they replace somebody that's so potentially iconic to a band. And I probably had this discussion before with regards to sort of Bruce Dickinson leaving Iron Maiden initially after Fear the Dark, and obviously that wasn't particularly long after Fish had left Marillion. So, but for me, I mean, obviously didn't know anything about Steve Hogarth. Obviously, most of us knew something about Blaze Bayley at the time. Anybody that was a Maiden fan, obviously they toured together anyway. But for me, this was the first time I heard anything by Steve Hogarth. But I absolutely loved this album, and I think potentially that was maybe because, and whether this was a conscious decision or not, I don't know, but this album could potentially have been sung by Fish. I think if Marillion had done another album, it would have been this anyway. Notice that the logo is still the same on this album, and it changes on the next album. I think the feel of the music on this, the way that the album tracks are written, are very similar to the album tracks on Clutching at Straws, and indeed a lot of other Marillion albums. Got very catchy hooks in them, and yeah, I mean it's a cracking album, but I think Steve didn't particularly put his stamp on this one. But like I said, whether that was by choice or not, I'm not so sure. There are elements in this, slight little nuances that you can see where the band was particularly going, but doesn't really come through. This, like I say, this to me is a cracking album, and I think it was probably the perfect introduction of Steve Hogarth, because I think it wasn't a huge detraction from Marillion as per the last album. But obviously as you move on to Holidays in Eden, so straight away we get a new typeface for Marillion. So you lose the old logo, which is essentially they've had that for, you know, since the beginning. So obviously this being the second album with Steve Hogarth, he has written or co-written most of the tracks on here. Now again, a lot of the tracks on Holidays in Eden again are quite commercial, quite catchy, that sort of thing, but this one certainly dives into the band where they sit now, a lot more. So they are certainly sort of playing around with different sounds, to be sort of broad and generic. But if you know Marillion of late, then you know what I mean. They sort of toy and play around with different sort of landscapes of sounds and what sounds can actually do, rather than, you know, potentially just playing with straightforward sounds from their instruments. But yeah, again, I think this is a fantastic album, and to see the progression of Steve Hogarth and the band through these two albums, I mean, you can see it straight away. But for me, obviously, progression to that, and obviously then beyond to, you know, pretty much where they are now, with obviously the latest album, Fear, it's fantastic. So I don't think we have that. With a lot of bands, you say, "Oh, which singer do you prefer?" For me, I don't really have a preference, because I almost think of these two eras of Marillion being two different bands. It's very difficult now to, when you take Fear and hold that up to something like Misplaced Childhood, it's almost like a completely different band. They have progressed their sound over the years to something probably completely different that would have happened if Fish had remained in the band. Certainly if you see where Fish's solo output has gone, you can imagine that's pretty much where Marillion would have stayed and would have ended up if Fish would have stayed in the band. So they've obviously gone in different paths, and that's a good thing, because at the moment we've now got the best of both worlds. So we still have a Marillion and we still have a Fish solo output, which is great, and I think both complement each other really well. So yeah, I mean, I'm not sure, I don't really see Marillion around much in the VC, so I'm not sure how many people actually pick up on their stuff. And again, whether it's the sort of, you know, for a lot of people, I think there's still that sort of Misplaced Childhood era, and Clutching at Straws to a certain extent, where people sort of maybe pigeonhole them as sort of pop, rather than sort of rock prog sort of style stuff. But hey ho. Just on the Marillion stuff, there's also a re-release of the Brave album coming out. So they recently made available the Brave album on their own web store in its entirety. So I think previously the last 3 tracks that were on the CD weren't actually pressed to vinyl, so the vinyl was like a cut down version. So they've re-released that, but there's also a new box coming out, which is a Steve Wilson remix. So as you guys know, I appreciate Steve Wilson's input on certain albums. So really looking forward to that. I mean, I think it's a 5-disc box set. I think two LP for the remaster, and then 3 LP, which is a live set of Brave. And I think it sort of follows in a similar sort of fashion to what the Misplaced Childhood one was. So, but anyway, so that's Marillion. So I really enjoyed listening to those again. And again, one of the bands that heavily influenced Marillion were, of course, Genesis. And again, Fish has certainly recited these guys as a huge influence on him as a child, so teenager, sort of growing up. Selling England by the Pound, fantastic album for me. I think this was probably the second Genesis album I heard, Nursery Crime being the first. Loved Nursery Crime, but yeah, I mean, this is cracking. This has got to be up there with you know, one of the best certainly progressive albums of all time. It's just superb. Absolutely love it. Quintessential English as well. Yeah, just listen to it and it just sounds English. So there's that, and also spun Foxtrot as well, which is another absolutely cracking album from Genesis. Absolutely superb. I think I have all their stuff anyway, by the original album, but I think I've got that on a sort of a reissue release type thing. Yeah, Genesis, superb band up until Gabriel left and Phil Collins decided to come out from behind his drum kit and start singing. But anyway, less said about that the better. So next, actually, spun this as well the other day, which was Roxy Music's debut. Again, there's a discussion on Twitter, actually kickstarted by Danny Baker. For those that you don't know, he's a UK TV writer, stroke comedian, stroke sort of rock punk lovey, I suppose. But yeah, superb wit. But he's got probably one of the best record collections in the world. His love of all things music is superb, and just following him on Twitter is great. Really funny chap, really intelligent, sort of well-read guy as well. But with his connections into TV and music and stuff anyway, it's certainly worthwhile listening to. But he said that obviously a lot of people didn't think this was a prog album, and it blatantly is. And I agree, it is a superb progressive album. Roxy Music, I suppose, generally weren't termed as being progressive. Again, I think potentially they were probably shoved into that sort of neo, sort of prog sort of vibe. But yeah, again, absolutely cracking album, great. And I think I've got all Roxy Music stuff as well. Do love Brian Ferry as a singer. I just think that, yeah, the band were great anyway. Obviously, Eno era as well. So yeah, Roxy Music's debut, top stuff. So then, sort of moving on slightly to something a bit heavier, but still in a similar vein. So this is Dream Theater's self-titled, but not the debut, obviously. Sort of came out in 2013. So this was the one before the Astonishing, which was the most recent album. Again, sort of fantastic Dream Theater. What more can you say? I mean, after listening to Images and Words, which I'd imagine is the way most people got into Dream Theater, for me they've sort of expanded their musical chops, and but they're still retaining pretty faithful to that sort of initial album. And again, I think I've recently shown the original debut without James LeBrion, and again, obviously they progressed a long way from that original album, even to Images and Words. But fantastic band. And again, if there's anybody out there that hasn't listened to a Dream Theater album, I recommend this is a good way actually. If anybody's into metal or prog, this is a good sort of crossover album. Really good to pick up, spot on. But yeah, I'm a big fan of Dream Theater, as you guys probably know already. Superb. So then some other sort of different prog stuff, different sort of non-prog stuff. Manic Street Preachers, Know Your Enemy. I'm trying to read that for a minute. Again, this is a superb Manics album. Really like this. Very cleverly written. Again, it has that commercial spin, but sort of serious message on a lot of the songs. Very well written lyrically and musically. However, this is the original Sony music release. It sounds absolutely horrendous. There's just far too much music on a single LP for this. That's half the problem. Has been recently released on music on vinyl, and I've not heard that pressing, but I would imagine it's exactly the same issue that this has, because it's still a single LP. This really needs to be released as a double. It's got 16 tracks on it, and it's just too quiet. And if there's any surface noise, which does happen to be on this, and I've played it, cleaned it a couple of times, but it's not particularly improved it. So yeah, you crank up the volume, but because everything's sort of all squashed in, you're sort of losing that sort of dynamic element to it as well, which is a shame, because I do really love this album, but it's just a shame that it's managed to be squeezed on one LP. They have been reissuing a lot of the Manic stuff anyway, but it's not really been advertised. So I think Sony have sort of reissuing stuff because they're quite prominent now and getting the vinyls reissued generally. Because I've noticed a few they're sort of creeping out, but I say just on the quiet. And yeah, this hasn't been one of them, so I'm not sure if they're planning on doing a double issue, but it'd be good if you could. So that was that. The one was one other I was going to show, which was, if I can find it. So one, again, it's just a metal EP. So this was Wraiths. So this is an English band based in Nottingham, I believe. This is their debut EP, 6-track EP. Again, traditional sort of, so I wouldn't say, obviously looking at the picture you'd probably assume sort of hair metal. They're not quite, I'd say they're a bit sort of heavier than that and a bit rougher, and sort of hair metal. Hands nicely placed for a reason. Yeah, so this is Naked Aggression. Yeah, it's a cracking EP. And when I picked it up actually, which wasn't that long ago, I didn't realise actually how limited it was. I think there was only 500 copies of this pressed. So quite lucky to get hold of a copy because I paid next to nothing for this. So yeah, but this is the only thing I have of theirs on vinyl actually, so I will look out for more stuff. I have seen their stuff sort of around, but never really picked it up. And again, particularly mainly because of the sort of the photos on the back didn't seem to sort of fit what I would be listening to. But again, quite surprised with the yeah, the quality of this one, so that's really good. So that's about it really. That's what I really wanted to show. So it's mainly been sort of the progressive side of things. Been re-listening to the Steve Wilson Hand Cannot Erase as well again, so that's really good. So so yeah, so that'll do it for now, I think. Thanks for watching guys, thanks for the new subs, and we'll see you soon. Cheers guys.